Right, welcome everyone. Here we are with another immersive research chat. A different take on it this time. It's this one's an interesting talk, I think, with a non-traditional academic, or maybe Peter, you might describe yourself as not an academic at all. But I would think that your knowledge on the topic we're going to talk about today is at a level where I want to kind of align it with some of the research stuff we do. So I've got Peter Robinson here today. He's going to talk to me about concussion. Peter, just want to introduce yourself for a moment or two, and then we'll get into kind of that setup that I just made there.
Okay, my name's Peter Robinson, and I'm the father of Benjamin Robinson, who unfortunately back in 2011 was involved in a rugby match. He was involved in a few heavy collisions and sustained multiple concussions. And unfortunately for us, he wasn't taken off. And 2 days later, he died as a result of those injuries.
Yeah. So the reason why we're talking today is I think twofold. One is to help get the message that you have developed following Ben's death out further. There'll be people that will look at this who I teach, who will look at this in relation to some of their work, a lot of sports coaches and things like that. But also what I want to try and do is really kind of highlight the notion of somebody knowing something from the inside. So with my work on concussion, I know it because I've had a concussion now, multiple concussions, and I'm sure that I know that you've played some sports and you've experienced them that way. But in terms of the knowledge of this sort of area and the place that you take within it, your experiences are so unique that you have such an insight that many other people will never be able to, or hopefully will never have. So this aligns with the sort of research that I talk about a lot, people studying things from the inside. So that's where I'm trying to make the link between your experiences and some of the research we talked about. So, I mean, just to get us going, you've introduced it a little bit, and I'll talk through. I will post some of the more some of the articles that people can read on to get some of the information.
Okay.
But if you could just tell us, since Ben's tragic accident, what have you done? How have you developed your work within concussion?
I suppose really the start of the journey, was 2 years later at Ben's inquest, right, where we heard all the evidence of what happened that day and all the witness statements and things. And having been in the police, I suppose you expected to hear a version of events, and it turned into a bit of a competition actually. But and really, we were hearing different versions. The kids had one version of the event, and the adults at the match had another version. But obviously, the coroner summed up at the end of the 2 weeks. We found out there was failures in the system. Referees and coaches weren't aware of some of the protocols in place. The kids playing that day had never been educated on the dangers of concussion. And, it was, like we said, the safety link in the chain. There was just too many breaks in that safety chain as such. And after that, really, the coroner ruled that, Ben had played for at least 25 minutes with a concussion and hadn't been removed. So for us, then we realized, well, Ben's death was preventable if the protocols had been followed. So the big issue for us was get that awareness out there, get that education out there. And for us, initially, it was the schools. We thought, right, that's the high-risk group in all this, the adolescents, get the information out there to them. And I suppose we started a chain of events when we spoke to, first of all, was the Scottish government. And they put out an education leaflet on concussion. And really then it was like a domino effect with all the different governments in the UK. Once one heard of the other doing it, it was just that knock-on effect. And basically, we spoke to all the ministers, the education ministers and health ministers in the UK, all about trying to raise awareness and education around the dangers of concussion.
Yeah, and I came across your campaign on Twitter, actually. And my mum's just about to come home. My mum's staying with us, so the dogs are going to go crazy. So sorry for this. And one of the things that caught my eye was the succinctness of the message.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And can you just tell us what that message is?
I suppose if in doubt, sit them out. Really, it's been there and thereabouts for a long time, but we sort of brought it to the surface as such. The FA had used it. World Rugby recognised and remove. If in doubt, sit them out. And really, I suppose from my point of view, being a volunteer coach and standing on a sideline, you realise sometimes a little bit of information can be dangerous because in Ben's case, Maddox questions being asked, the finger test for eye tracking, we realised don't overcomplicate it. If you have reason to go to a kid in the first place, just remove them. So it was keeping that message simple. And I've been involved now, and like you said about academics, and I think sometimes the message is lost in translation. So you need a simplified message so everybody, non-medics on the sideline, a parent, a mum, a dad, a kid playing, they know the basics. And if they know that, I suppose it's like, first responder. If they remove the kid from any further chance of injury, then they've done their part. You know?
And I like that message because when we're talking about academics and me being one of them who often gets the message lost in the complexities and the nuances and whatnot, we can't have that when we're working in this kind of very important and very acute situation. A person who has done this very well, you may be aware of his work, is Dominic Malcolm, and his analysis maintains all of that nuance, and he talks about the medical uncertainty that there is within sport and within concussion, but actually comes to the end of it, and the finger test is a variety of different cognition tests and all of that sort of stuff, but comes to exactly the same conclusion as you. If you think there's a thing, that's it. You've got it. You don't have to have 4 measures of this and 2 of that, and someone who knows this and someone who knows that, because when you speak to the doctors don't actually know the right terms a lot of the times. So I think that's whenever I see 2 people or groups of people come to the same conclusion from very different positions, that usually tells me that there's something right about it. And Dominic Malcolm's kind of message is that, look, we don't know enough about concussion yet. We still need to know more. So precaution is the way forward. So in terms of the kind of success, would you say it's been successful, the campaign in some ways?
Yeah, I suppose it's like everything, from my point of view, there's always more could be done. But I suppose when I see a message at an international ground, around the stadium now, you realise from us holding a banner as a family to signage up around Murrayfield, BT Murrayfield, you realise, we're getting there. We're getting there, and you see it in the match day programme at the Ulster matches. You see it at the international autumn series, in the Scottish programs. So you realise, we're starting to get the message out there. But for me, I want a kid who starts off his sporting career, or even somebody who's not involved in sport, that he's hammered with this message and there's no way to avoid it. So it's a bit like, road safety, Green Cross Code, these are all life-saving messages. And I suppose I want somebody to reach 18 where they can then decide, about the dangers. And it's about informed choice. Because a lot of mums and dads won't say, oh, that sport's too dangerous. But a kid will always want to play. The risk is part of the fascination there in a way, So it's about that informed choice. Get the information out there. And I think a hindrance for that in the past has been, sporting bodies trying to protect their sport rather than the players' welfare. And it's like, oh, if we say it the wrong way, we're going to put children off playing or put mums and dads off, allowing their kids to play. So it's getting the message right, and I think the if in doubt, set them out. It's not a scary message. It's just do the right thing, and terminology has a big part to play in all this, concussion. When you talk about a mild concussion, when you use the right terminology, well, it's a brain injury. And all of a sudden I call it the meerkat syndrome. People sit up and go, brain injury. And, that's when they take it seriously. It's like the red mist clears and they go, oh, right, we have to do this.
And funnily enough, you mentioned that my paper on concussion, I specifically use the term brain injury. One, because of that exact response. Let's not beat around the bush. in the same way that I have a knee injury, I have a brain injury. If my knee injury is bad, I can't play sport anymore.
Yeah.
If my brain injury is bad, I can't play sport anymore. It's as simple as that. It finishes a career.
Yeah.
And I use that language, one, for that message, and two, because what do I know? All I know is that if I can't see things, I
Yeah.
fall over, I'm seeing stars, I'm out cold, whatever bit of this myriad of definitions of concussion there are, there's something happened to my brain which wasn't good. So we're going to call that an injury. And I think you're right to do that. And I do that as a part of that paper, because when I'm speaking to boxers, I'm not an expert. They're definitely not experts in what concussion is. So I can't ask them, have you had a concussion?
Yeah.
Because who are they to define it? So,
Yeah.
but have you, and I think we talked about this when we set this up, have you felt dazed? Have you been wobbled? And we hear this language, and the difference between dazed and wobbled and whatever other language which reduces it, reduces the meaning, reduces the importance, is that brain injury heightens the importance straight away. So I think that's a really good thing to do. In terms of the successes, so the message is out there, and that looks great. Where but you kind of alluded to it, there's more to do. What would be the next things? Where would you go next?
I suppose for me, we're seeing at grassroots level. Ben's brother Gregor, his younger brother, he's 15 now, and he's a footballer. And their kit, they carry the logo, the If in Doubt Set Them Out logo on all their kit. And again, that's the domino effect. We're seeing that. We're seeing the Scottish referees in rugby now wearing that. We're not, and again, it's a visual reminder. We have seen it. It causes it starts discussions. We've had rugby teams in South Africa with the logo, and all of a sudden it's discussion. And I suppose from a coach's point of view or a parent's point of view, it's a constant reminder to do the right thing, because you go over to a kid and he's on the pitch and he's on the knee, and that reminder is just, it takes you out of the red mist of the competition of the game, and it's just to do the right thing. The game's one thing, but a kid's brain's another. You have to look after it, and that's it. So yeah, we're seeing that, and the more and more teams, basketball, across the board. It's not just rugby, football, hockey. So to me, it's a brand, and we need to promote it.
Yeah. And netball as well is one that I've come across recently as well. One interesting one within my sports, or combat sports, is in amateur boxing, for example, the referees jump in very quickly. And my students will have watched one of my fights, and it doesn't even seem like the fight should be over, but it's stopped because this lad's even slightly wobbled. But in professional boxing, this is an issue that can't be figured out in such a simple way, because if someone gets knocked down, that's the same issue we're talking about. It's a brain injury, but they get 10 counts or an 8 count to carry on. So there is a boxing in many ways has been ahead of the game with this up until about 10 years or so ago. But now the policies that are being acted, such as yours, this notion of, okay, if you're in doubt, sit them out, that in one respect changes the sport of boxing fundamentally. That's something that those sports are going to have to tackle at some level. The further success that you have with your campaign, and I think you told me you boxed, hadn't you, as well, personally?
Yeah, I boxed it. Well, whether I was a willing boxer or not, but I was in the army for a short time.
Right.
Apparently, I had a bit of ability. So in the army, basically, you have your platoon fights and things like that, and they weigh 10 fighters, and basically you could fight the next guy, but he could be a stone heavier you, but he's the nearest to you. So and I must admit I enjoyed it, and I've done judo and jiu-jitsu and things as a kid, going through all the clubs and just trying stuff out, and I did like the combat side of things.
And this is where you said it earlier about the action. My prof always used to tell me that action is the juice, which is a line from the film Heat.
Yeah.
And it's that for most of us, non-professional athletes. If you're a professional athlete, it might be the money, fair enough.
Yeah.
But for most of us, we do sport for the fun, for the enjoyment. And this is where we have to, one, remember that's why we do it, but two, remember that pushes people to do things that they shouldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you said, the red mist comes down, and we do these sort of things. And what I think you're kind of talking about in a broad sense is changing the culture, so that if a kid is having fun and wants to carry on, they're easier to say no to, and the coaches are quicker to say no, despite wanting this kind of enjoyment and excitement to continue on. That is a hard one to try and tackle, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's flipping that switch and getting them, kids don't see next week or the month. They live in the here and now. Yeah. And I think it's actually flicking that switch to say, if you look after this injury correctly and manage it, you're actually going to have more game time. Where if you mismanage it, you're maybe going to shorten your career, or you're going to have to retire early because you've mismanaged the injury. And I suppose in a way, it's like any other injury. If you mismanage ACL or whatever, if you don't rehab and do it properly, you're going to be out of the sport sooner than you want. So it's when you say to, also when somebody's competitive and you say you're not reaching your 100%, you can't play at 100% because you have a brain injury, so you're the weak link. So when in a team game, it's I suppose it's just hitting those points and saying you're the weak link here. You need removed and let somebody who is 100% play. You need to trust your teammates to be able to do your job. And so it's clicking on that, it's trying to nip in on those bits. And when you say somebody, you're the weak link, because I know when I played rugby, if somebody got dinged or somebody you seen they weren't right, that was the first place you put the ball, the high ball up to them. And you use that weakness.
Yeah.
And, as a dad now, that's awful when you think about it. That is what you do. You see a weakness, you go for it.
Yeah, and that is the culture of sport. And I think what we have to do is we have to, well, two things. I always campaign to change the culture of sport. Campaign, teach my students, try wherever I do in my research to make that the clear thing, so that sort of thing doesn't happen. That's a very utopian way of doing it. Your project is not utopian. It's pragmatic. It's clear, and it's saying, this is the world we live in. Here's the way we can do something about that. Here's the language we can use, which is like you say, the flicking the switch for the young athletes. You're letting the side down by staying on. You're not going to be playing in the final if you stay on. And that is using the kind of almost the language of sport that can be problematic, but to some way solve the problem. I do think my solution to this, which is utopian, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. My solution to this, when let's say I'm teaching sports coaches, is that if they can hang on to the notion of fun rather than performance, and they can think if they can teach their young rugby players, footballers, whatever, that the game fundamentally, even if they're playing at a high level, should still be fun. Now, I wouldn't have got the damage that I had to me if it was just for fun, but I wanted to compete. I wanted to compete, and I had to prove some things. If it was just for fun, I never would have done that. And I make the same kind of analogy when people are taking drugs and supplements that they shouldn't be taking. You wouldn't do that if it was just for fun. Is there a way we can kind of bring the game back away from performance in some way, or competition at all costs? We've got to win. Can we make this about fun? And if you get a ding on the head, just sit down and come and have fun next week. Is there a way that can be a part of it?
I don't know. I think rugby changed when it became professional. Because strength and conditioning, nutrition, and what people forget is schools adapt that. It all filters down. Whatever's done at the top elite level, it filters down because certain coaches want to be that level. Even though they're kids, they want them to be that level. Ben had been on a strength and conditioning program for 2 years, but had never been instructed or informed about concussion. Never, ever. So it's that important information that the game thought was important. No problem disseminating that, and nutrition about your shakes and your protein and So I remember somebody saying about a kid playing football. Their team won 7-1, and he touched the ball twice, and was that successful from that day? But he played in a game, they were beat 1-0, and he touched the ball 90% of the game. But he had more fun in the loss. And I suppose it's that emphasis on what was the positive. What was the positive? He improved his game in the loss rather than the 7-1 game that he won and never touched the ball. So I think getting fun back into kids' sports, to me, a lot of kids are falling out of sport now because they're told they're not good enough. But the real importance should be they're still playing.
Yes.
You know, we have kids who go to pro soccer, and after a year, you know, they're really good players. They go and they're told they're not good enough. Now we're told the stats are 1 in 700 actually make it, you know, into pro football. But these kids are at a great level. They're told they're not good enough, so they just drop out of sport.
Yeah.
And surely the whole idea, when I played sport, you played for the love of it, you know. And if the first didn't have a game, you asked, did the seconds have a game? If the seconds didn't have a game, you asked, did the thirds? And you go down, and you didn't have the arrogance of, well, I'm a first player. You just wanted to play the game, and you didn't care at what level. You enjoyed playing and turning up on a Saturday morning, and the whole, like we say, you know, getting the juice, you know, getting that buzz from just running out onto the pitch, you know. I think
Yeah,
we've lost that.
there's certainly a lot to be said for this kind of professionalization and the way that it's driven things. That's a great example as well. 2 years of strength and conditioning, but
Yeah.
not one conversation about concussion. Like,
and even actually after Ben's death, Ulster Rugby, and I'm not getting into Ulster Rugby, but it shows you what their mindset was.
Yeah.
They sent a strength and conditioning coach down from Ulster. Now I would have been a lot happier if the Ulster medic had come down and give the boys a chat about concussion and what to look out for on their teammates. And, you know, because that was one of the things, you know, Ben's inside centre, you know, Ben spoke to him, and it was, like I said, it was a missed opportunity. It was the perfect storm. All these wee things didn't seem like much, but when you put them together, it was clear we had a brain injured player on the pitch. You know, he told, you know, Ben told him, I can't remember the last tackle, and they actually laughed about it. They joked about it, you know. But now we know that we've had other players put their hand up and go, ref, he doesn't remember. He doesn't remember the line out code. So I think it's, sometimes people think, you know, people self-diagnose, but let's face it, if you've got a brain injury, you're the last one to know.
yes.
You know, it's like asking a drunk driver, "Are you okay to drive?"
Yeah.
Every drunk driver, "I'm fine." You know, your brain impaired. We shouldn't expect people to remove themselves. You know.
Yeah, you've hit on the nail on the head of literally a changing culture there, haven't you?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if the story before was, oh, isn't that funny? You know, as I've done,
Yeah.
I couldn't see for a little bit. You've broken my nose. Oh, isn't that funny? To ref, listen, my teammates just told me this, get him off. That's a fundamental change in culture, which is kind of, I guess, what I was alluding to earlier in terms of raising awareness is one thing, but raising awareness and that shifting into the grassroots level,
Yeah.
so that people think about this in a different way is really important change, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other thing that I was just thinking then, I think it's going to slip out of my head, unfortunately. Yes, sorry. It will come back to me in a moment. Just in terms of just now moving into this kind of this link I want to make for anybody who comes to my website, really, because for this kind of notion of immersive research. Now, clearly from our conversations today, you understand this topic in such kind of in detail, and in some respects raw detail because of your experiences. You know, someone who, how do you feel like your experiences have helped you, one, to really get to know the topic, and two, to be listened to by people?
I think, you know, it's funny. I remember once a paper saying concussion expert, and I thought, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. You know, and it didn't sit well with me. You know, Willie Stewart and these guys, they're brain injury experts. It's like I said, if somebody asks me a question, I'll pass them and say, ask Willie Stewart. Spend half an hour with Willie Stewart, and you'll understand what a brain injury is. I'm an expert in what happened on the day with Ben, and what went wrong, and what should have been in place, and what could have been.
I've lost you.
And that's where I would consider, you know, I'm a concussion campaigner. I suppose that's a better title to have than I'm certainly not an expert, you know. But
yeah, no, I'd agree, and I'd say that most people aren't. The recognised experts in concussion, we'd think of them as medical people and whatnot, but you're clearly an expert in this area, as you've said, specifically the accident and the things that have gone on from it. And I like that sort of knowledge to be valued. And I think it's too easy to not value it, and to just, you know, who's the latest medical expert in this. but the medical expert doesn't talk about or mostly won't talk about the breakdowns in the chain that you've described, the knowledge from the inside of that world, from the cultural shifts that you've described. All of that is the stuff that helps us understand the kind of the way in which you've done the changes, that literally the changing of the culture.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the side that I'm interested in. In that side, of course, you're an expert in that. So I think that's kind of the message I'm trying to pull forth is when people go into researching a topic that they are passionate about and love trying to understand more of, or are driven to understand more of. You might not love doing this, but you're driven to do it.
Yeah.
It brings forth a different set of knowledges, which I think is quite interesting. And anyone who's listening to this, I think will glean that from you already, that you are an expert in these kind of areas. I guess that's the kind of issue I'm looking at, is this notion of when does the line move from quote unquote academic knowledge to this more what you called it, activist knowledge.
Yeah.
And the activists, it's an interesting one because you're so engaged with it. And so the second part of that question was, has it enabled you to be listened to more because of your experiences? Have people sat up and gone, oh, okay, we have to listen now?
I suppose for me, an example of that, Dr. Willie Stewart, obviously through in Glasgow, before Ben's death, he had been trying to highlight this issue.
Right.
And then obviously Ben's death being second impact syndrome, the first in the UK, or the first recognised in the UK, I would say, that was a foot in the door. Willie, it was my wife Carol contacted Willie because he had done a piece on the news explaining what second impact syndrome was. So we met up with Willie, and unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, Ben's death was that foot in the door. That's what made people sit up in the UK and say, right, we need to take this seriously now. And I suppose it's like anything in change. Sometimes it's been a tragic event that has created the change.
Yeah.
But I used to always think when I was in the police and there was always changes in policy and things, it's funny, the people it affected, they never spoke to us. They would never come to the front line and speak to us, all the policymakers and changers, and say, what's your view? And I think concussion can be a wee bit like that.
Yeah.
It's like, we joke sometimes about, helmets and lab rats and, and rabbits and things. And you're saying, somebody's joke said, when's the last time you've seen a rat playing rugby?
Yeah.
Let's take it out and what's practical and what's on the pitch and what we're seeing. And, there's so many levels from rugby alone. And Ben's case was referee, parents. We now have parents who've got the confidence to go onto the pitch and say, he's not right. And one of those cases was a bleed on the brain, and when we hear that, we know we're going forward. And it's interesting. It's normally mums. See the amount of mums that contact us. So whether it's because I ask this question all the time to myself, if I'd have been there that day, having played rugby, would I have noticed that there was more intensity, or would I have just been the buy-in? I'm a rugby dad, to take him off, he would be soft. Ben told his mum, never come on the pitch and embarrass me. But she was so close to doing that, but she was told to calm down, mum, by the referee, because she was made to feel that she was being over, just worried, just the typical mum, But it's interesting that mums, whether it's just that different makeup in them, that they can sense when something's not right with their boy, whereas we are maybe coming from a rugby background or a fighting background, it's like ingrained in you to carry on,
One of the problems here is that what we call the survivor bias. So the lads who always enjoyed rugby or physical contact anyway, who stay involved in it, who go on to have kids, they're the survivors.
Yeah.
For whatever reason they've survived, and now they bring that forth in their children. You forget all the chaps who have left the sport, and are not involved and are not taking their kids there. And if it had been one of them, they would have gone, well, that's too much. But it's us who have been ingrained in these kind of sporting attitudes. That you're right. I think you're right to think critically about that. Of like, would I have just been like, yeah, it's fine. This is just a rough and tumble game.
Yeah.
While ever we are embedded in that culture, how do we change that? So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're highlighting in some respects. I've remembered the thing that I forgot earlier, the value of the knowledge within different sports, the value of strength and conditioning, the value of nutrition, and that those things are invested in, researched, strength and conditioning coaches paid for. Where's the money going? It's going there, but then not concussion. And what does it show you? It shows you the value that's placed on performance rather than health. And kind of what you're pulling us back to is a value on health.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, I've said this before, World Rugby, John Olomo, when he came on the scene, you know, I know when I played, you could tell the different positions by everybody's body shape.
Right.
And then John Olomo came on, and what was he, 6'5", could run 100 meters in so many seconds.
Yeah.
And if you remember all the clips, you know, like the typical video clips that you get, the big hits, and you've John Olomo running over 5 Englishmen in the World Cup. And all of a sudden, the viewing figures went up in rugby, and the attendances anywhere he played. And it's like somewhere in rugby, somewhere their ivory towers, they went, that's what we want to see. That's what people will want to see. People being crushed. And now John Olomo wouldn't look out of place in some schoolboy teams. When you see the schoolboy South African teams, because of strength and conditioning, you realise how much the game has transformed because of professionalism. But now it's like we created that monster. Now we're seeing what damage it's done. It's like, how do you get the monster back in the cage? You know, how do we stop these concussions now? Because they've gone through the roof. World Rugby will say it's because we're recognising them. There's greater awareness. But, you know, when you have 18, 19 stone guys colliding, there's only going to be one result, like, you know.
Yeah. If people are on average 4 or 5 stone heavier, but the width of the skull is the same, basically, you know, that's just simple, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's funny, or it's not funny, it's interesting that a lot of, again, the stuff that you're talking about, professionalism, focus on performance, these bigger bodies, it's all stuff that within my discipline of sociology, people have been talking about since the 80s. We work in America on NFL, and see, even before that in some respects, but we haven't been able to do much about it as a discipline. And this is, again, I'm coming back to where I think your really important places within this kind of change of the world. Like academics can do so much. Academics aren't usually as invested in the topic as you are, and that shows something that what can be done when you research a topic, understand a topic from such an inside position. People sit up and listen. You know it in such a kind of a passionate way that people have to take note. And if I talk about this topic, I can draw on some of my experiences to some degree, but not in the way that you can. And I think, and the same with other academics. You know, we mentioned talking to Katie earlier, and she's had experiences with her teammates as well, and she can kind of bring that in as well. But whenever it's academics, we just don't get listened to as much as maybe we should. So activists from the inside are the ones who often can make that change. So that was kind of the kind of message that I was trying to pull out, I think. Okay, and anything else to kind of mention just to tie us up, to kind of pull us together? Maybe where you might send people to go to read a bit more about this or anything like that?
Well, it's on website where a policy, you know, it's a good one, and that's for all sports, because we realized, you know, concussion in boxing, concussion in cycling, concussion in rugby, it's the same injury. And I think for years that's been the problem, that each sport has thought it's our injury, we'll look after it. Because when we went down to Westminster, obviously Chris Nowinski was over from the, you know, obviously, you know, Boston, and, you know, having been WWE wrestler, you know, and American footballer, it was like when we mentioned about, look what's happened in the NFL, you know, it was like, but that's the NFL. They wear helmets. Let's, you know, we're rugby.
Right. Yeah.
It's like he thought we were trying to reinvent the wheel. It's like he said we were 6 years behind. Because people wanted ownership of the injury, as if they said, but it's not as bad in our sport. But, you know, now we realize, that's why the Sports Scotland came out with the one policy fits all at grassroots. It's obviously different for professional sports when you've got medics at the side of the pitch. But for grassroots, because we realised some sports had really good policies, like rugby. Rugby was sort of leading the way, but other sports had nothing at all. It was like something written on the back of a cigarette packet in there. But I think that was the big thing, saying that this is the same injury, guys. Let's deal with it the same way and have a common message that should you be a top class medic, or should you be a mum or a dad or a kid, a 12-year-old kid on a pitch, that everybody knows what to do. It's funny when you mention concussion or brain injury, everybody straight goes to it's a bad message. But if everybody's aware of it, it's actually a positive thing. It's flipping that switch again. It's like we don't call swimming lessons drowning lessons. That it's swimming lessons, and they're there for a reason. I learned that when my dad threw me into the pool, and that was it. You learned to swim, and that's why I think kids, we sort of undervalue what kids are capable of. And should that be just he was out there, and that happened on match day, and the adult went, I'll be the judge of that. But that action had been followed up on. Well,
and in fact, the simplistic child mind might be the one for this, instead of the complexity that people, no, he didn't count to 10 backwards the wrong way, and he could see my finger, and whoa, he was out, he's off.
Well, that's one of the biggest things is, when we have kids who we know are, they talk about ataxia, and again, to me, that's Bambi on ice. That's how I explain to our kids. If they look like Bambi on ice, get them off, and that term's ataxia, in the medical field. But it's getting that terminology right, that it's kid friendly, and we're all available to do that, and just be like a first responder. Stick your finger in the hole and make sure they don't bleed. You don't need to know how to suture and do all this and do all that. It's get them safely to someone that does know what to do. And that's because the medics, I've been brought up in that culture where when somebody asks me questions on a pitch, what score, what half are you in, all that, I thought if I answered them correctly, I was okay. But it's only now, probably a couple of years ago, that I realized they're there to rule in concussion, not to rule out. And when you realize it like that, when you could get 5 questions right, but you're still concussed. And it's getting that message out there to people who think they're doing the right thing. The finger waggers and all that. If you have to even go down that road, there's enough evidence to remove them. So so I think that, like I said, I think there's the misuse of information is as dangerous as no information. A wee bit, if I ask them questions and he gets them right, he's okay, he can play. A bit of more knowledge, you'll realize no, that's not the case at all. The Maddox was only brought in to be used off the pitch to see if somebody needed to go to hospital or not. But instead, we've used it as a diagnostic tool. And it's like the pocket scat that is handed out around sports. That's a recognition tool. That's where it should end. It's not a diagnostic tool. I think if we sort that all out, we're getting down the road a bit quicker.
So I guess it's raising awareness and education and all the rest of it, but still with a very simple message at its core. That we don't understand this that well, and for all the tests in the world, if you're in doubt, it's funny when you kind of get these. What I would talk about is really complex problems. This is a complex problem with, as we talked about, we've got identity, professionalism, cultural norms, all this stuff mixing around. But actually, the solution is quite simple. Especially in this one, be overly precautious. In certain places, it doesn't pay to be overly precautious, but in a game, which is what we're largely talking about, for fun. When we're talking about brain health. Caution's fine.
Having been involved in the army and the police and things like that, you have life and death situations where you carry on, but not for a game. Not for a game. In the marketing of sport nowadays, you see the guys, and it's like this battle, we must win that. you know, nobody should die playing a game they love, you know, and I think people, you know, I used to have a coach who'd want you to run through brick walls, that sort of thing. And one guy went, well, would not be better to run round? You know, it's like, you know, and the coach, no, I want you to buy into this, you know, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know, heart and soul and put everything into it. And then you realize a wee bit of common sense.
yeah,
You know, I'm maybe getting my mate to help me over the wall, but I'm not going to
yeah,
run it. I'm going to injure myself and then I'm not helping you, you know. So, yeah, common sense, you know. I remember having a big meeting once with all these academics and all the medical side of things, and came out and we're in the car park, and a guy said, "You're very pragmatic. You'd used the word earlier on." I had to go and look that up on my phone. I wasn't sure whether they had insulted me or not, you know. And I went, all right. And maybe, you know, sometimes it can be too simplistic, but having been in the police and things, and you have to deal there and then, has to be black and white, because
yeah,
when you start complicating the message, that's when it all goes.
yeah,
That's when it goes wrong. It's like Chinese whispers.
yeah,
Too much information can destroy the message.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
Cool. I think that's good. I think we've pulled around a variety of different issues there. I know that my students that I teach will find this really, really useful, and I sent it to Katie Liston as well, so she'll hopefully send it to hers, and hopefully off my website it will go to other people and all the rest of it. But even if it just gets to a few coaches that
yeah,
see this and just think, oh yeah, well then we've done our little bit, haven't we?
yeah.
You've done a lot already, but even in this moment we've done a bit as well. So thanks for that. I really appreciate
No,
it.
no worries. Thanks, Chris, for the platform for doing it.
Cheers.